kinds of laws. There were not a few who, remembering God, treated their slaves in a humane manner, and not as beasts of burden, while there were others who were seldom known to perform a kind or generous action. But the most barbarous and tyrannical of all were those former serfs who arose from the dirt and became princes. It was this latter class who made life literally a burden to those who were unfortunate enough to come under their rule. Many of them had arisen from the ranks of the peasantry to become superintendents.
Figura 1/4.
To work for their master a certain number of days
Flat.
each week. There was plenty of land and water, and the soil was rich and fertile, while the meadows and forests were sufficient to supply the needs of both the peasants and their lord. There was a certain nobleman who had chosen a superintendent from the peasantry on one of his other estates. No sooner had the power to govern been vested in this newly made official than he began to practice the most outrageous cruelties upon the poor serfs who had been placed under his control. Although this man had a wife and 2 married daughters, and was making so much money that he could have lived happily without transgressing in any way against either God or man, yet he was filled with envy and jealousy, and deeply sunk in sin. Michael Simeonovitch began his persecutions by compelling the peasants to perform more days of service on the estate every week than the laws obliged them to work. He established a brickyard in which he forced the men and women to do excessive labor, selling the bricks for his own profit. On one occasion, the overworked serfs sent a delegation to Moscow to complain of their treatment to their lord, but they obtained no satisfaction. When the poor peasants returned disconsolate from the nobleman, their superintendent determined to have revenge for their boldness in going above him for redress, and their life and that of their fellow victims became worse than before. It happened that among the serfs there were some very treacherous people who would falsely accuse their fellows of wrongdoing and sow seeds of discord among the peasantry, whereupon Michael would become greatly enraged, while his poor subjects began to live in fear of their lives. When the superintendent passed through the village, the people would run and hide themselves as from a wild beast. Seeing thus the terror which he had struck to the hearts of the mujiks, Michael's treatment of them became still more vindictive, so that from overwork and ill usage, the lot of the poor serfs was indeed a hard one. There was a time when it was possible for the peasants, when driven to despair, to devise means whereby they could rid themselves of an inhuman monster such as Simeonovitch, and so these unfortunate people began to consider whether something could not be done to relieve them of their intolerable yoke. They would hold little meetings in secret places to bewail their misery and to confer with one another as to which would be the best way to act. Now and then, the boldest of the gathering would rise and address his companions in this strain. How much longer can we tolerate such a villain to rule over us? Let us make an end of it at once, for it were better for us to perish than to suffer. It is surely not a sin to kill such a devil in human form. It happened once, before the Easter holidays, that one of these meetings was held in the woods, where Michael had sent the serfs to make a clearance for their master. At noon they assembled to eat their dinner and to hold a consultation. "Why can't we leave now?" said one. "Very soon we shall be reduced to nothing. Already we are almost worked to death, there being no rest, night or day, either for us or our poor women. If anything should be done in a way not exactly to please him, he will find fault and perhaps flog some of us to death, as was the case with poor Simeon, whom he killed not long ago. Only recently Anisim was tortured in irons till he died. We certainly cannot stand this much longer." "Yes," said another. "What is the use of waiting? Let us act at once. Michael will be here this evening, and will be certain to abuse us shamefully. Let us then thrust him from his horse, and with one blow of an axe give him what he deserves, and thus end our misery. We can then dig a big hole and bury him like a dog, and no one will know what became of him. Now, Let us come to an agreement, to stand together as one man and not to betray one another. The last speaker was Vasily Minayev, who, if possible, had more cause to complain of Michael's cruelty than any of his fellow serfs. The superintendent was in the habit of flogging him severely every week, and he took also Vasily's wife to serve him as cook. Accordingly, during the evening that followed this meeting in the woods, Michael arrived on the scene on horseback. He began at once to find fault with the manner in which the work had been done, and to complain because some lime trees had been cut down. "I told you not to cut down any lime trees," shouted the enraged superintendent. "Who did this thing? Tell me at once, or I shall flog every one of you." On investigation, a peasant named Sidor was pointed out as the guilty one, and his face was roundly slapped. Michael also severely punished Vasily because he had not done sufficient work, after which the master rode safely home. In the evening the serfs again assembled, and poor Vasily said, "Oh, what kind of people are we anyway? We are only sparrows and not men at all. We agree to stand by each other, but as soon as the time for action comes, we all run and hide. Once a lot of sparrows conspired against a hawk, but no sooner did the bird of prey appear than they sneaked off in the grass. Selecting one of the choicest sparrows, the hawk took it away to eat, after which the others came out crying, 'Twee, twee,' and found that one was missing. 'Who is killed?' they asked. 'Vanka. Well, he deserved it. You, my friends, are acting in just the same manner. When Michael attacked Sidor, you should have stood by your promise. Why didn't you arise, and with one stroke put an end to him and to our misery?' The effect of this speech was to make the peasants more firm in their determination to kill their superintendent. The latter had already given orders that they should be ready to plough during the Easter holidays and to sow the field with oats, whereupon the serfs became stricken with grief and gathered in Vasily's house to hold another indignation meeting. 'If he has really forgotten God,' they said, 'and shall continue to commit such crimes against us, it is truly necessary that we should kill him. If not, let us perish, for it can make no difference to us now.' This despairing program, however, met with considerable opposition from a peaceably inclined man named Peter Mikhayev. 'Brethren,' said he, 'you are contemplating a grievous sin. The taking of human life is a very serious matter. Of course, it is easy to end the mortal existence of a man, but what will become of the souls of those who commit the deed? If Michael continues to act toward us unjustly, God will surely punish him. But my friends, we must have patience.' This pacific utterance only served to intensify the anger of Vasily. Said he, 'Peter is forever repeating the same old story. It is a sin to kill anyone. Certainly it is sinful to murder, but we should consider the kind of man we are dealing with. We all know it is wrong to kill a good man, but even God would take away the life of such a dog as he is. It is our duty, if we have any love for mankind, to shoot a dog that is mad. It is a sin to let him live. If, therefore, we are to suffer at all, let it be in the interests of the people, and they will thank us for it. If we remain quiet any longer, a flogging will be our only reward.' 'You are talking nonsense, Mikhayev. Why don't you think of the sin we shall be committing if we work during the Easter holidays, for you will refuse to work then yourself?' 'Well then,' replied Peter, 'if they shall send me to plough, I will go, but I shall not be going of my own free will, and God will know whose sin it is, and shall punish the offender accordingly. Yet we must not forget him. Brethren, I am not giving you my own views only. The law of God is not to return evil for evil. Indeed, if you try in this way to stamp out wickedness, it will come upon you all the stronger. It is not difficult for you to kill the man, but his blood will surely stain your own soul. You may think you have killed a bad man, that you have gotten rid of evil, but you will soon find out that the seeds of still greater wickedness have been planted within you. If you yield to misfortune, it will surely come to you. As Peter was not without sympathizers among the peasants, the poor serfs were consequently divided into two groups, the followers of Vasily and those who held the views of Mikhaev. On Easter Sunday, no work was done. Toward the evening, an elder came to the peasants from the nobleman's court and said, "Our superintendent, Michael Semyonovich, orders you to go tomorrow to plough the field for the oats." Thus the official went through the village and directed the men to prepare for work the next day, some by the river and others by the roadway. The poor people were almost overcome with grief, many of them shedding tears, but none dared to disobey the orders of their master. On the morning of Easter Monday, while the church bells were calling the inhabitants to religious services, and while everyone else was about to enjoy a holiday, the unfortunate serfs started for the field to plough. Michael arose rather late and took a walk about the farm. The domestic servants were through with their work and had dressed themselves for the day, while Michael's wife and their widowed daughter, who was visiting them, as was her custom on holidays, had been to church and returned. A steaming samovar awaited them, and they began to drink tea with Michael, who, after lighting his pipe, called the elder to him. "Well," said the superintendent, "have you ordered the mujiks to plough today?" "Yes, sir, I did," was the reply. "Have they all gone to the field?" "Yes, sir, all of them. I directed them myself where to begin." "That is all very well. You gave the orders, but are they ploughing? Go at once and see, and you may tell them that I shall be there after dinner. I shall expect to find 1.5 acres done for every 2 ploughs, and the work must be well done. Otherwise they shall be severely punished, notwithstanding the holiday." "I hear, sir, and obey." The elder started to go, but Michael called him back. After hesitating for some time, as if he felt very uneasy, he said, "By the way, listen to what those scoundrels say about me. Doubtless some of them will curse me, and I want you to report the exact words. I know what villains they are. They don't find work at all pleasant. They would rather lie down all day and do nothing. They would like to eat and drink and make merry on holidays, but they forget that if the ploughing is not done, it will soon be too late. So you go and listen to what is said, and tell it to me in detail. Go at once." "I hear, sir, and obey." Turning his back and mounting his horse, the elder was soon at the field where the serfs were hard at work. It happened that Michael's wife, a very good-hearted woman, overheard the conversation which her husband had just been holding with the elder. Approaching him, she said, "My good friend, Mishinka, diminutive of Michael, I beg of you to consider the importance and solemnity of this holy day. Do not sin for Christ's sake. Let the poor mujiks go home." Michael laughed, but made no reply to his wife's humane request. Finally, he said to her, "You've not been whipped for a very long time, and now you have become bold enough to interfere in affairs that are not your own." "Mishinka," she persisted, "I have had a frightful dream concerning you. You had better let the mujiks go." "Yes," said he, "I perceive that you have gained so much flesh of late that you think you would not feel the whip. Look out." Rudely thrusting his hot pipe against her cheek, Michael chased his wife from the room, after which he ordered his dinner. After eating a hearty meal consisting of cabbage soup, roast pig, meat cake, pastry with milk, jelly, sweet cakes, and vodka, he called his woman cook to him and ordered her to be seated and sing songs, Semyonovich accompanying her on the guitar. While the superintendent was thus enjoying himself to the fullest satisfaction in the musical society of his cook, the elder returned, and making a low bow to his superior, proceeded to give the desired information concerning the serfs. "Well," asked Michael, "did they plough?" "Yes," replied the elder, "they have accomplished about half the field." "Is there no fault to be found?" Not that I could discover. The work seems to be well done. They are evidently afraid of you. How is the soil? Very good. It appears to be quite soft. Well, said Simeonovitch after a pause, what did they say about me? Cursed me, I suppose. As the elder hesitated somewhat, Michael commanded him to speak and tell him the whole truth. Tell me all, said he. I want to know their exact words. If you tell me the truth, I shall reward you. But if you conceal anything from me, you will be punished. See here, Catherine. Pour out a glass of vodka to give him courage. After drinking to the health of his superior, the elder said to himself, It is not my fault if they do not praise him. I shall tell him the truth. Then, turning suddenly to the superintendent, he said, They complain, Michael Simeonovitch. They complain bitterly. But what did they say? Demanded Michael. Tell me. Well, one thing they said was, He does not believe in God. Michael laughed. Who said that? He asked. It seemed to be their unanimous opinion. He has been overcome by the evil one, they said. Very good, laughed the superintendent. But tell me what each of them said. What did Vasily say? The elder did not wish to betray his people, but he had a certain grudge against Vasily, and he said, He cursed you more than did any of the others. But what did he say? It is awful to repeat it, sir. Vasily said, He shall die like a dog, having no chance to repent. Oh, the villain, exclaimed Michael. He would kill me if he were not afraid. All right, Vasily, we shall have an accounting with you. And Tishka, he called me a dog, I suppose. Well, said the elder, they all spoke of you in anything but complimentary terms, but it is mean in me to repeat what they said. Mean or not, you must tell me, I say. Some of them declared that your back should be broken. Simeonovitch appeared to enjoy this immensely, for he laughed outright. We shall see whose back will be the first to be broken, said he. Was that Tishka's opinion? While I did not suppose they would say anything good about me, I did not expect such curses and threats. And Peter Mikhaev, was that fool cursing me too? No, he did not curse you at all. He appeared to be the only silent one among them. Mikhaev is a very wise mujik, and he surprises me very much. At his actions, all the other peasants seemed amazed. What did he do? He did something remarkable. He was diligently ploughing, and as I approached him, I heard someone singing very sweetly. Looking between the ploughshares, I observed a bright object shining. Well, what was it? Hurry up! It was a small 5-kopeck wax candle, burning brightly, and the wind was unable to blow it out. Peter, wearing a new shirt, sat
A roadbox, yeah?
as he ploughed. While he handled the implement, the candle continued to burn. In my presence, he fixed the plough, shaking it violently, but the bright little object between the fingers remained undisturbed. And what did Mikhaev say? He said nothing, except when, on seeing me, he gave me the holy day salutation, after which he went on his way singing and ploughing as before. I did not say anything to him, but on approaching the other mujiks, I found that they were laughing and making sport of their silent companion. It is a great sin to plough on Easter Monday. They said, You could not get absolution from your sin if you were to pray all your life. And did Mikhaev make no reply? He stood long enough to say, There should be peace on earth and goodwill to men. After which he resumed his ploughing and singing, the candle burning even more brightly than before. Simeonovitch had now ceased to ridicule, and putting aside his guitar, his head dropped on his breast, and he became lost in thought. Presently he ordered the elder and cook to depart, after which Michael went behind a screen and threw himself upon the bed. He was sighing and moaning, as if in great distress, when his wife came in and spoke kindly to him. He refused to listen to her, exclaiming, "He has conquered me, and my end is near." "Mishinka," said the woman, "arise and go to the mujiks in the field. Let them go home, and everything will be all right. Heretofore you have run far greater risks without any fear, but now you appear to be very much alarmed." "He has conquered me," he repeated. "I am lost." "What do you mean?" demanded his wife angrily. "If you will go and do as I tell you, there will be no danger. Come, Mishinka," she added tenderly. "I shall have the saddle horse brought for you at once." When the horse arrived, the woman persuaded her husband to mount the animal and to fulfill her request concerning the serfs. When he reached the village, a woman opened the gate for him to enter, and as he did so, the inhabitants, seeing the brutal superintendent whom everybody feared, ran to hide themselves in their houses, gardens, and other secluded places. At length, Michael reached the other gate, which he found closed also, and being unable to open it himself while seated on his horse, he called loudly for assistance. As no one responded to his shouts, he dismounted and opened the gate, but as he was about to remount and had one foot in the stirrup, the horse became frightened at some pigs, and sprang suddenly to one side. The superintendent fell across the fence, and a very sharp picket pierced his stomach, when Michael fell unconscious to the ground. Toward the evening, when the serfs arrived at the village gate, their horses refused to enter. On looking around, the peasants discovered the dead body of their superintendent lying face downward in a pool of blood where he had fallen from the fence. Peter Mikhayev alone had sufficient courage to dismount and approach the prostrate form, his companions riding around the village and entering by way of the backyards. Peter closed the dead man's eyes, after which he put the body in a wagon and took it home. When the nobleman learned of the fatal accident which had befallen his superintendent, and of the brutal treatment which he had meted out to those under him, he freed the serfs, exacting a small rent for the use of his land and the other agricultural opportunities. And thus the peasants clearly understood that the power of God is manifested not in evil, but in goodness.
A Lost Opportunity. A short story by Leo Tolstoy. Then came Peter to him and said, "Lord, how oft shall my brother sin against me, and I forgive him? Till 7 times? So likewise shall my heavenly Father do also unto you, if ye from your hearts forgive not everyone his brother their trespasses." St. Matthew. In a certain village there lived a peasant by the name of Ivan Sherbakov. He was prosperous, strong, and vigorous, and was considered the hardest worker in the whole village. He had 3 sons who supported themselves by their own labor. The eldest was married, the second about to be married, and the youngest took care of the horses and occasionally attended to the plowing. The peasant's wife, Ivanovna, was intelligent and industrious, while her daughter-in-law was a simple, quiet soul, but a hard worker. There was only one idle person in the household, and that was Ivan's father, a very old man who for 7 years had suffered from asthma, and who spent the greater part of his time lying on the brick oven. Ivan had plenty of everything: 3 horses with 1 colt, a cow with calf, and 15 sheep. The women made the men's clothes, and in addition to performing all the necessary household labor, also worked in the field, while the men's industry was confined altogether to the farm. What was left of the previous year's supply of provisions was ample for their needs, and they sold a quantity of oats sufficient to pay their taxes and other expenses. Thus, life went smoothly for Ivan. The peasant's next-door neighbor was a son of Gordy Ivanov, called Gavril the Lame. It once happened that Ivan had a quarrel with him, but while old man Gordy was yet alive, and Ivan's father was the head of the household, the two peasants lived as good neighbors should. If the women of one house required the use of a sieve or pail, they borrowed it from the inmates of the other house. The same condition of affairs existed between the men. They lived more like one family, the one dividing his possessions with the other, and perfect harmony reigned between the two families. If a stray calf or cow invaded the garden of one of the farmers, the other willingly drove it away, saying, "Be careful, neighbor, that your stock does not again stray into my garden. We should put a fence up." In the same way, they had no secrets from each other. The doors of their houses and barns had neither bolts nor locks, so sure were they of each other's honesty. Not a shadow of suspicion darkened their daily intercourse. Thus lived the old people. In time, the younger members of the two households started farming. It soon became apparent that they would not get along as peacefully as the old people had done, for they began quarreling without the slightest provocation. A hen belonging to Ivan's daughter-in-law commenced laying eggs, which the young woman collected each morning, intending to keep them for the Easter holidays. She made daily visits to the barn, where, under an old wagon, she was sure to find the precious egg. One day the children frightened the hen, and she flew over their neighbor's fence and laid her egg in their garden. Ivan's daughter-in-law heard the hen cackling, but said, "I am very busy just at present, for this is the eve of a holy day, and I must clean and arrange this room. I will go for the egg later on." When evening came, and she had finished her task, she went to the barn, and as usual looked under the old wagon, expecting to find an egg. But alas, no egg was visible in the accustomed place. Greatly disappointed, she returned to the house and inquired of her mother-in-law and the other members of the family if they had taken it. "No," they said, "we know nothing of it." Taraska, the youngest brother-in-law, coming in soon after, she also inquired of him if he knew anything about the missing egg. "Yes," he replied, "your pretty crested hen laid her egg in our neighbor's garden, and after she had finished cackling, she flew back again over the fence." The young woman, greatly surprised on hearing this, turned and looked long and seriously at the hen, which was sitting with closed eyes beside the rooster in the chimney corner. She asked the hen where it laid the egg. At the sound of her voice, it simply opened and closed its eyes, but could make no answer. She then went to the neighbor's house, where she was met by an old woman who said, "What do you want, young woman?" Ivan's daughter-in-law replied, "You see, Babushka, grandmother, my hen flew into your yard this morning. Did she not lay an egg there?" "We did not see any," the old woman replied. "We have our own hens, God be praised, and they have been laying for this long time. We hunt only for the eggs our own hens lay, and have no use for the eggs other people's hens lay. Another thing I want to tell you, young woman, we do not go into other people's yards to look for eggs." Now this speech greatly angered the young woman, and she replied in the same spirit in which she had been spoken to, only using much stronger language and speaking at greater length. The neighbor replied in the same angry manner, and finally the women began to abuse each other and call vile names. It happened that old Ivan's wife, on her way to the well for water, heard the dispute and joined the others, taking her daughter-in-law's part. Gavril's housekeeper, hearing the noise, could not resist the temptation to join the rest and to make her voice heard. As soon as she appeared on the scene, she too began to abuse her neighbor, reminding her of many disagreeable things which had happened, and many which had not happened, between them. She became so infuriated during her denunciations that she lost all control of herself and ran around like some mad creature. Then all the women began to shout at the same time, each trying to say two words to another's one and using the vilest language in the quarreller's vocabulary. "You are such and such. shouted one of the women. "You are a thief, a shluka, a mean, dirty, low creature. Your father-in-law is even now starving, and you have no shame. You beggar, you borrowed my sieve and broke it. You made a large hole in it and did not buy me another. You have our scale beam," cried another woman, "and must give it back to me." Whereupon she seized the scale beam and tried to remove it from the shoulders of Ivan's wife. In the melee which followed, they upset the pails of water. They tore the covering from each other's head, and a general fight ensued. Gavril's wife had by this time joined in the fracas, and he, crossing the field and seeing the trouble, came to her rescue. Ivan and his son, seeing that their womenfolk were being badly used, jumped into the midst of the fray, and a fearful fight followed. Ivan was the most powerful peasant in all the country round, and it did not take him long to disperse the crowd, for they flew in all directions. During the progress of the fight, Ivan tore out a large quantity of Gavril's beard. By this time, a large crowd of peasants had collected, and it was with the greatest difficulty that they persuaded the two families to stop quarreling. This was the beginning. Gavril took the portion of his beard which Ivan had torn out, and wrapping it in a paper, went to the Volosnoy, Mujik's court, and entered a complaint against Ivan. Holding up the hair, he said, "I did not grow this for that bear Ivan to tear out." Gavril's wife went round among the neighbors, telling them that they must not repeat what she told them, but that she and her husband were going to get the best of Ivan, and that he was to be sent to Siberia. And so the quarreling went on. The poor old grandfather, sick with asthma and lying on the brick oven all the time, tried from the first to dissuade them from quarreling, and begged of them to live in peace, but they would not listen to his good advice. He said to them, "You children are making a great fuss and much trouble about nothing. I beg of you to stop and think of what a little thing has caused all this trouble. It has arisen from only one egg. If our neighbor's children picked it up, it is all right. God bless them. One egg is of but little value, and without it, God will supply sufficient for all our needs." Ivan's daughter-in-law here interposed and said, "But they called us vile names." The old grandfather again spoke, saying, "Well, even if they did call you bad names, it would have been better to return good for evil, and by your example, show them how to speak better. Such conduct on your part would have been best for all concerned." He continued, "Well, you had a fight, you wicked people. Such things sometimes happen, but it would be better if you went afterward and asked forgiveness and buried your grievances out of sight. Scatter them to the four winds of heaven. For if you do not do so, it will be the worse for you in the end." The younger members of the family, still obstinate, refused to profit by the old man's advice, and declared he was not right, and that he only liked to grumble in his old-fashioned way. Ivan refused to go to his neighbor as the grandfather wished, saying, "I did not tear out Gavril's beard. He did it himself, and his son tore my shirt and trousers into shreds." Ivan entered suit against Gavril. He first went to the village justice, and not getting satisfaction from him, he carried his case to the village court. While the neighbors were wrangling over the affair, each suing the other, it happened that a birch bolt from Gavril's wagon was lost, and the women of Gavril's household accused Ivan's son of stealing it. They said, "We saw him in the night time pass by our window on his way to where the wagon was standing. And my Kamushka, sponsor," said one of them, "told me that Ivan's son had offered it for sale at the Kabak tavern." This accusation caused them again to go into court for a settlement of their grievances. While the heads of the families were trying to have their troubles settled in court, their home quarrels were constant and frequently resulted in hand-to-hand encounters. Even the little children followed the example of their elders and quarreled incessantly. The The women, when they met on the riverbank,
But it's
the
fucking
family
quarrel,
worship,
you can.
instead of attending to their work, passed the time in abusing each other, and not infrequently they came to blows. At first, the male members of the families were content with accusing each other of various crimes, such as stealing and like meannesses. But the trouble in this mild form did not last long. They soon resorted to other measures. They began to appropriate one another's things without asking permission, while various articles disappeared from both houses and could not be found. This was done out of revenge. This example being set by the men, the women and children also followed, and life soon became a burden to all who took part in the strife. Ivan Sherbakov and Gavril the Lame, at last, laid their trouble before the Miar village meeting, in addition to having been in court and calling on the justice of the peace. Both of the latter had grown tired of them and their incessant wrangling. One time, Gavril would succeed in having Ivan fined, and if he was not able to pay it, he would be locked up in the cold, dreary prison for days. Then it would be Ivan's turn to get Gavril punished in like manner, and the greater the injury the one could do the other, the more delight he took in it. The success of either in having the other punished only served to increase their rage against each other until they were like mad dogs in their warfare. If anything went wrong with one of them, he immediately accused his adversary of conspiring to ruin him, and sought revenge without stopping to inquire into the rights of the case. When the peasants went into court and had each other fined and imprisoned, it did not soften their hearts in the least. They would only taunt one another on such occasions, saying, "Never mind, I will repay you for all this." This state of affairs lasted for 6 years. Ivan's father, the sick old man, constantly repeated his good advice. He would try to arouse their conscience by saying, "What are you doing, my children? Can you not throw off all these troubles, pay more attention to your business, and suppress your anger against your neighbors? There is no use in your continuing to live in this way, for the more enraged you become against each other, the worse it is for you." Again was the wise advice of the old man rejected, and at the beginning of the 7th year of the existence of the feud, it happened that a daughter-in-law of Ivan's was present at a marriage. At the wedding feast, she openly accused Gavril of stealing a horse. Gavril was intoxicated at the time and was in no mood to stand the insult. So in retaliation, he struck the woman a terrific blow, which confined her to her bed for more than a week. The woman being in delicate health, the worst results were feared. Ivan, glad of a fresh opportunity to harass his neighbor, lodged a formal complaint before the district attorney, hoping to rid himself forever of Gavril by having him sent to Siberia. Now, on examining the complaint, the district attorney would not consider it, as by that time the injured woman was walking about, and as well as ever. Thus again, Ivan was disappointed in obtaining his revenge, and, not being satisfied with the district attorney's decision, had the case transferred to the court, where he used all possible means to push his suit. To secure the favor of the Starshina, village mayor, he made him a present of half a gallon of sweet vodka, and to the mayor's pisar, secretary, also he gave presents. By this means, he succeeded in securing a verdict against Gavril. The sentence was that Gavril was to receive 20 lashes on his bare back, and the punishment was to be administered in the yard which surrounded the courthouse. When Ivan heard the sentence read, he looked triumphantly at Gavril to see what effect it would produce on him. Gavril turned very white on hearing that he was to be treated with such indignity, and turning his back on the assembly, left the room without uttering a word. Ivan followed him out, and as he reached his horse, he heard Gavril saying, "Very well, my spine will burn from the lashes, but something will burn with greater fierceness in Ivan's household before long." Ivan, on hearing these words, instantly returned to the court, and going up to the judges said, "Oh, just judges, he threatens to burn my house, and all it contains. A messenger was immediately sent in search of Gavril, who was soon found and again brought into the presence of the judges. "Is it true," they asked, "that you said you would burn Ivan's house and all it contained?" Gavril replied, "I did not say anything of the kind. You may give me as many lashes as you please, that is, if you have the power to do so. It seems to me that I alone have to suffer for the truth, while he, pointing to Ivan, is allowed to do and say what he pleases." Gavril wished to say something more, but his lips trembled, and the words refused to come. So in silence, he turned his face toward the wall. The sight of so much suffering moved even the judges to pity, and becoming alarmed at Gavril's continued silence, they said, "He may do both his neighbor and himself some frightful injury." "See here, my brothers," said one feeble old judge, looking at Ivan and Gavril as he spoke, "I think you had better try to arrange this matter peaceably. You, brother Gavril, did wrong to strike a woman who was in delicate health. It was a lucky thing for you that God had mercy on you, and that the woman did not die. For if she had, I know not what dire misfortune might have overtaken you. It will not do either of you any good to go on living as you are at present. Go, Gavril, and make friends with Ivan. I am sure he will forgive you, and we will set aside the verdict just given." The secretary, on hearing this, said, "It is impossible to do this on the present case. According to Article 117, this matter has gone too far to be settled peaceably now, as the verdict has been rendered and must be enforced." But the judges would not listen to the secretary, saying to him, "You talk altogether too much. You must remember that the first thing is to fulfill God's command to love thy neighbor as thyself, and all will be well with you." Thus, with kind words, the judges tried to reconcile the two peasants. Their words fell on stony ground, however, for Gavril would not listen to them. "I am 50 years old," said Gavril, "and have a son married, and never from my birth has the lash been applied to my back. But now this bear Ivan has secured a verdict against me, which condemns me to receive 20 lashes, and I am forced to bow to this decision and suffer the shame of a public beating. Well, he will have cause to remember this." At this, Gavril's voice trembled, and he stopped speaking, and turning his back on the judges, took his departure. It was about 10 versts distance from the court to the homes of the neighbors, and this Ivan traveled late. The women had already gone out for the cattle. He unharnessed his horse and put everything in its place, and then went into the Izba room, but found no one there. The men had not yet returned from their work in the field, and the women had gone to look for the cattle, so that all about the place was quiet. Going into the room, Ivan seated himself on a wooden bench and soon became lost in thought. He remembered how, when Gavril first heard the sentence which had been passed upon him, he grew very pale and turned his face to the wall, all the while remaining silent. Ivan's heart ached when he thought of the disgrace which he had been the means of bringing upon Gavril, and he wondered how he would feel if the same sentence had been passed upon him. His thoughts were interrupted by the coughing of his father, who was lying on the oven. The old man, on seeing Ivan, came down off the oven and, slowly approaching his son, seated himself on the bench beside him, looking at him as though ashamed. He continued to cough as he leaned on the table and said, "Well, did they sentence him?" "Yes, they sentenced him to receive 20 lashes," replied Ivan. On hearing this, the old man sorrowfully shook his head and said, "This is very bad, Ivan, and what is the meaning of it all? It is indeed very bad, but not so bad for Gavril as for yourself. Well, suppose his sentence is carried out, and he gets the 20 lashes. What will it benefit you?" "He will not again strike a woman," Ivan replied. "What is it he will not do? He does not do anything worse than what you are constantly doing." This conversation enraged Ivan, and he shouted, "Well, what did he do? He beat a woman nearly to death, and even now he threatens to burn my house. Must I bow to him for all this?" The old man sighed deeply as he said, "You, Ivan, are strong and free to go wherever you please, while I've been lying for years on the oven. You think that you know everything, and that I do not know anything. No, you are still a child, and as such, you cannot see that a kind of madness controls your actions and blinds your sight. The sins of others are ever before you, while you resolutely keep your own behind your back. I know that what Gavril did was wrong, but if he alone should do wrong, there would be no evil in the world. Do you think that all the evil in the world is the work of one man alone? No, it requires two persons to work much evil in the world. You see only the bad in Gavril's character, but you are blind to the evil that is in your own nature. If he alone were bad and you good, then there would be no wrong." The old man, after a pause, continued, "Who tore Gavril's beard? Who destroyed his heaps of rye? Who dragged him into court? And yet you try to put all the blame on his shoulders. You are behaving very badly yourself, and for that reason you are wrong. I did not act in such a manner, and certainly I never taught you to do so. I lived in peace with Gavril's father all the time we were neighbors. We were always the best of friends. If he was without flour, his wife would come to me and say, 'Dear Frol, grandfather, we need flour.' I would then say, 'My good woman, go to the warehouse and take as much as you want.' If he had no one to care for his horses, I would say, 'Go, Ivanushka,' diminutive of Ivan, 'and help him to care for them.' If I required anything, I would go to him and say, 'Grandfather Gordy, I need this or that,' and he would always reply, 'Take just whatever you want.' By this means, we passed an easy and peaceful life. But what is your life compared with it? As the soldiers fought at Plevna, so are you and Gavril fighting all the time, only that your battles are far more disgraceful than that fought at Plevna." The old man went on, "And you call this living? And what a sin it all is! You are a peasant and the head of the house. Therefore the responsibility of the trouble rests with you. What an example you set your wife and children by constantly quarreling with your neighbor. Only a short time since your little boy Taraska was cursing his aunt Arena, and his mother only laughed at it, saying, 'What a bright child he is.' Is that right? You are to blame for all this. You should think of the salvation
Ah,
of your
Dio
soul.
porco.
Is that the way to do it? You say one unkind word to me, and I will reply with two. You will give me one slap in the face, and I will retaliate with two slaps. No, my son, Christ did not teach us foolish people to act in such a way. If anyone should say an unkind word to you, it is better not to answer at all. But if you do reply, do it kindly, and his conscience will accuse him, and he will regret his unkindness to you. This is the way Christ taught us to live. He tells us that if a person smite us on the one cheek, we should offer unto him the other. That is Christ's command to us, and we should follow it. You should therefore subdue your pride. Am I not right?" Ivan remained silent, but his father's words had sunk deep into his heart. The old man coughed and continued, "Do you think Christ thought us wicked? Did he not die that we might be saved? Now you think only of this earthly life. Are you better or worse for thinking alone of it? Are you better or worse for having begun that Plevna battle? Think of your expense at court and the time lost in going back and forth, and what have you gained? Your sons have reached manhood and are able now to work for you. You are therefore at liberty to enjoy life and be happy. With the assistance of your children, you could reach a high state of prosperity, but now your property, instead of increasing, is gradually growing less. And why? It is the result of your pride. When it becomes necessary for you and your boys to go to the field to work, your enemy instead summons you to appear at court or before some kind of judicial person. If you do not plow at the proper time and sow at the proper time, Mother Earth will not yield up her products, and you and your children will be left destitute. Why did your oats fail this year? When did you sow them? Were you not quarreling with your neighbor instead of attending to your work? You have just now returned from the town, where you have been the means of having your neighbor humiliated. You have succeeded in getting him sentenced, but in the end, the punishment will fall on your own shoulders. Oh, my child, it would be better for you to attend to your work on the farm and train your boys to become good farmers and honest men. If anyone offend you, forgive him for Christ's sake, and then prosperity will smile on your work, and a light and happy feeling will fill your heart. Ivan still remained silent. The old father, in a pleading voice, continued, "Take an old man's advice. Go and harness your horse, drive back to the court, and withdraw all these complaints against your neighbor. Tomorrow go to him, offer to make peace in Christ's name, and invite him to your house. It will be a holy day, the birth of the Virgin Mary. Get out the samovar and have some vodka, and over both forgive and forget each other's sins, promising not to transgress in the future, and advise your women and children to do the same." Ivan heaved a deep sigh, but felt easier in his heart as he thought, the old man speaks the truth, yet he was in doubt as to how he would put his father's advice into practice. The old man, surmising his uncertainty, said to Ivan, "Go, Ivanushka, do not delay. Extinguish the fire in the beginning before it grows large, for then it may be impossible." Ivan's father wished to say more to him, but was prevented by the arrival of the women, who came into the room chattering like so many magpies. They had already heard of Gavril's sentence and of how he threatened to set fire to Ivan's house. They found out all about it, and in telling it to their neighbors, added their own versions of the story, with the usual exaggeration. Meeting in the pasture ground, they proceeded to quarrel with Gavril's women.
Dio can quarrel, porco dio.
Had threatened to secure the influence of the manager of a certain noble's estate in behalf of his friend Gavril. Also, that the school teacher was writing a petition to the Tsar himself against Ivan, explaining in detail his theft of the perch bolt and partial destruction of Gavril's garden, declaring that half of Ivan's land was to be given to them. Ivan listened calmly to their stories, but his anger was soon aroused once more when he abandoned his intention of making peace with Gavril. As Ivan was always busy about the household, he did not stop to speak to the wrangling women, but immediately left the room, directing his steps toward the barn. Before getting through with his work, the sun had set, and the boys had returned from their ploughing. Ivan met them and asked about their work, helping them to put things in order and leaving the broken horse collar aside to be repaired. He intended to perform some other duties, but it became too dark, and he was obliged to leave them till the next day. He fed the cattle, however, and opened the gate that Taraska might take his horses to pasture for the night, after which he closed it again and went into the house for his supper. By this time he had forgotten all about Gavril and what his father had said to him. Yet, just as he touched the doorknob, he heard sounds of quarreling proceeding from his neighbor's house. "What do I want with that devil?" shouted Gavril to someone. "He deserves to be killed." Ivan stopped and listened for a moment, when he shook his head threateningly and entered the room. When he came in, the apartment was already lighted. His daughter-in-law was working with her loom, while the old woman was preparing the supper. The eldest son was twining strings for his lap-tie, peasant's shoes made of strips of bark from the linden tree. The other son was sitting by the table reading a book. The room presented a pleasant appearance, everything being in order, and the inmates apparently gay and happy, the only dark shadow being that cast over the household by Ivan's trouble with his neighbor. Ivan came in very cross, and angrily throwing aside a cat which lay sleeping on the bench, cursed the women for having misplaced a pail. He looked very sad and serious, and seating himself in a corner of the room, proceeded to repair the horse collar. He could not forget Gavril, however, the threatening words he had used in the courtroom, and those which Ivan had just heard. Presently, Taraska came in, and after having his supper, put on his sheepskin coat, and taking some bread with him, returned to watch over his horses for the night. His eldest brother wished to accompany him, but Ivan himself arose and went with him as far as the porch. The night was dark and cloudy, and a strong wind was blowing, which produced a peculiar whistling sound that was most unpleasant to the ear. Ivan helped his son to mount his horse, which, followed by a colt, started off on a gallop. Ivan stood for a few moments looking around him and listening to the clatter of the horses' hooves as Taraska rode down the village street. He heard him meet other boys on horseback who rode quite as well as Taraska, and soon all were lost in the darkness. Ivan remained standing by the gate in a gloomy mood, as he was unable to banish from his mind the harassing thoughts of Gavril which the latter's menacing words had inspired. Something will burn with greater fierceness in Ivan's household before long. He is so desperate, thought Ivan, that he may set fire to my house regardless of the danger to his own. At present, everything is dry, and if the wind is so high, he may sneak from the back of his own building, start a fire, and get away unseen by any of us. He may burn and steal without being found out, and thus go unpunished. I wish I could catch him. This thought so worried Ivan that he decided not to return to his house, but went out and stood on the street corner. I guess, thought Ivan to himself, I will take a walk around the premises and examine everything carefully, for who knows what he may be tempted to do. Ivan moved very cautiously round to the back of his buildings, not making the slightest noise, and scarcely daring to breathe. Just as he reached a corner of the house, he looked toward the fence, and it seemed to him that he saw something moving, and that it was slowly creeping toward the corner of the house opposite to where he was standing. He stepped back quickly and hid himself in the shadow of the building. Ivan stood and listened, but all was quiet. Not a sound could be heard but the moaning of the wind through the branches of the trees and the rustling of the leaves as it caught them up and whirled them in all directions. So dense was the darkness that it was at first impossible for Ivan to see more than a few feet beyond where he stood. After a time, however, his sight becoming accustomed to the gloom, he was enabled to see for a considerable distance. The plough and his other farming implements stood just where he had placed them. He could see also the opposite corner of the house. He looked in every direction, but no one was in sight, and he thought to himself that his imagination must have played him some trick, leading him to believe that someone was moving when there really was no one there. Still, Ivan was not satisfied and decided to make a further examination of the premises. As on the previous occasion, he moved so very cautiously that he could not hear even the sound of his own footsteps. He had taken the precaution to remove his shoes, that he might step the more noiselessly. When he reached the corner of the barn, it again seemed to him that he saw something moving, this time near the plough, but it quickly disappeared. By this time, Ivan's heart was beating very fast, and he was standing in a listening attitude when a sudden flash of light illumined the spot, and he could distinctly see the figure of a man seated on his haunches with his back turned toward him, and in the act of lighting a bunch of straw which he held in his hand. Ivan's heart began to beat yet faster, and he became terribly excited, walking up and down with rapid strides, but without making a noise. Ivan said, "Well, now he cannot get away, for he will be caught in the very act." Ivan had taken a few more steps when suddenly a bright light flamed up, but not in the same spot in which he had seen the figure of the man sitting. Gavril had lighted the straw, and running to the barn, held it under the edge of the roof, which began to burn fiercely, and by the light of the fire, he could distinctly see his neighbor standing. As an eagle springs at a skylark, so sprang Ivan at Gavril, saying, "I will tear you into pieces. You shall not get away from me this time." But Gavril the Lame, hearing footsteps, wrenched himself free from Ivan's grasp and ran like a hare past the buildings. Ivan, now terribly excited, shouted, "You shall not escape me," and started in pursuit. But just as he reached him and was about to grasp the collar of his coat, Gavril succeeded in jumping to one side, and Ivan's coat became entangled in something, and he was thrown violently to the ground. Jumping quickly to his feet, he shouted, "Carol, dirty! Watch, catch!" While Ivan was regaining his feet, Gavril succeeded in reaching his house, but Ivan followed so quickly that he caught up with him before he could enter. Just as he was about to grasp him, he was struck on the head with some hard substance. He had been hit on the temple as with a stone. The blow was struck by Gavril, who had picked up an oaken stave, and with it gave Ivan a terrible blow on the head. Ivan was stunned, and bright sparks danced before his eyes, while he swayed from side to side like a drunken man, until finally all became dark, and he sank to the ground unconscious. When he recovered his senses, Gavril was nowhere to be seen, but all around him was as light as day. Strange sounds proceeded from the direction of his house, and turning his face that way, he saw that his barns were on fire. The rear parts of both were already destroyed, and the flames were leaping toward the front. Fire, smoke, and bits of burning straw were being rapidly whirled by the high wind over to where his house stood, and he expected every moment to see it burst